Okay, welcome everyone. Let's go ahead and get started with prayers for tonight's class, and Jana has agreed to lead us in those, so I'll let her do that.
We'll do the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha 3 times in English. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shaki clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Short mandala offering, once in English. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this is a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. Refuge in Bodhicitta, once in English, twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki chognam la jangchu bardu dagni kyab suchi dagi chunyen gi pe sonam gi drola penchir sangye drupar shog sangye chodang soki chognam la jangchu bardu dagni kyab suchi dagi chunyen gi pe sonam gi drola penchir sangye drupar shog.
Thank you, Jana. Let's do a short meditation before we begin, just spending a few minutes focusing the mind by meditating on the breath, and use whatever technique you prefer for that. And then I'll come in and lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation for tonight's teaching. So we can begin the meditation now. let's set our motivation for tonight. And recall that we're in the section of the text where Nagarjuna is encouraging us to see samsara for what it is and to develop a turning away from cyclic existence. In other words, the mind of renunciation. Recall that this is essential in regard to our generating the motivation of bodhicitta, because we first have to see the unsatisfactory nature of our own existence. We have to see that what we are engaged in, having gone from lifetime to lifetime since beginningless time, and never having found any place of true peace. Specifically, we're going through the various realms of existence, starting with the lower realms. And those places, of course, are places of great misery, unbelievable suffering. And that alone should be enough to induce this mind that wishes to achieve liberation, wishes to be free of the causes of cycling. And as we're going to see tonight, it's not just, of course, the lower realms, but even the higher realms have an unsatisfactory nature. And there is no true peace in samsara. As long as we are under the control of our karma and our delusions, we will continue to experience the round of existence, going from life to life, and never having any true happiness. So generate that mind of renunciation as a beginning point for generating bodhicitta, seeing that our own situation is pretty dire, that we have to do something to address it, to change it. But then to include others within the scope of this motivation, because we see that they are just like us. There's no difference in terms of their fundamental situation. Their unique situation at the moment might be very different from ours. Beings in the upper realms, beings in the lower realms, and so on. Every one of these beings is under the control of the same causes that we are experiencing, our karma, our delusions, and especially the root of ignorance. So when we generate bodhicitta, it's just simply developing the same compassion for others that we have generated for ourselves. A wish for all beings to be free from suffering and to attain the true happiness that they seek. And then, of course, the recognition that to do this, we must become enlightened ourselves. Therefore, we're going to continue our survey of this text so we can increase the positive states of mind that will support our becoming enlightened and diminish and eventually eliminate all of the obscurations and negative tendencies that are blocking us. It's for this reason that we've come together tonight to work on ourselves and our own understanding and realizations so we can eventually help others to do the same. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes fully and we'll begin. So again, we had our grueling session on the hell realms 2 weeks ago. So we won't be revisiting the hell realms, but nonetheless, we are going to continue with the lower realms. We're going next to the realms of animals, and I'm not going to spend too much time with the realm of animals because we know they're suffering fairly well, because we can witness animals in terms of their existence is all around us, at least the animals that we share this world with. I think there are also animals in some of the other realms, the God realms, what have you. But certainly the animals that are in the human realm with us in this world, we can see their suffering. So the following verse is stated in a very general sense in regard to the suffering of animals. An animal birth state has suffering of many kinds, those of being killed, Essentially everything that is out there that is an animal is the prey of some other animal, other than maybe the largest animals that are, on the planet, being bound, being beaten, and such. The most dreadful lot of eating each other awaits those who've abandoned peace-bringing virtue. So animals are essentially, that's the biggest problem, is that they don't really have any means of accumulating any sort of virtue. Of course, this is also true for the hell realm beings and the pretas, as we're going to see. It's very unlikely that beings in those realms can generate a virtuous state of mind. So I'm just going to mention that you might even look up some advice that Lama Zopa Rinpoche provides around caring for animals, and those animals that we do have some proximity towards, our pets, beings that we see on a regular basis. We should be attending to their spiritual needs as well as feeding them and caring for them medically and what have you. Try to play mantras for them, recite practice in front of them, do whatever you can to plant seeds in their minds, because those seeds will ripen into virtue at some point and will be a part of creating the causes to connect them to the Dharma, and certainly to connect them to you as potentially even being their teacher in a future life. So this is one way that we can work with the idea of the animals that we see. But Lama Zopa used to always talk about how he'd watch these nature videos, and certainly some of them are hard to watch, right? Where you see animals being preyed upon, and uh, uh, the what's the plains of Serengeti plains or whatever in Africa or various other parts of the world. Certainly, some of the ocean films are pretty frightening in terms of what happens to beings there. But this is what their life is essentially like. We look at our pets, and our pets have a very cushy life compared to most animals, because they're not in danger of losing their lives at any second. But you can see those imprints in our pets, even where they have some sense of fear when, you know, the UPS truck comes, or when, you know, there's you leave the house and they're kind of a little terrified of, are you going to come back, or what's going to happen to me, kind of thing. So we do see that animals' lives are generally lived in much fear. The animal, I didn't mention this, I don't think, with the hell realms. The hell realms are said to be primarily a product of the delusion of anger. And that makes some sense, right? Because so much of what happens there is very kind of violent action towards us. That's a product of angry minds. Not that it's only angry or actions with anger that lead you there, but that's kind of where that realm comes from. It's a manifestation of the mind of anger. The animal realm is actually said to be a manifestation of the mind of ignorance, and particularly the grosser forms of ignorance, of just kind of not having kind of a general awareness of samsara and things, on a conventional level. Certainly, the realm of all the realms are a product of the deeper ignorance that doesn't know the nature of reality. So let's go on to take a look at what Venerable Rendawa says in his commentary on that verse, as well as there's a few more verses regarding the animals and the suffering of the animals. Since animals, unlike humans, do not travel upright, but rather in bent over fashion, they are called those who travel bent over. And I guess this is just a derivation of the Sanskrit word tiryak that refers to animals. Beings in that birth state are killed by humans and other creatures, bound with ropes and such, beaten with whips and the like, that should say, and generally experience endless harm from both human and non-human beings. Right? A lot of animals are subject to harm from humans, becoming beasts of burden and what have you, or being hunted for their skins, for their horns, for whatever. Animals have eschewed the virtue that brings peace, that is nirvana, such as that which coincides with absolute discernment, meaning that they are unfit to give rise to such virtues, right? The virtues that will lead them to have the discernment of the nature of things and what have you. They just don't have the ability to create that virtue. And because in their environment animals inevitably prey on one another, this lot is said to be most dreadful. I mean, I might mention that certainly there are animals that do engage in, some form of virtue, particularly with regard to their offspring. I remember hearing about a cat that was living in a building that burned. I think it was in New York City. And I think they gave the cat this name Scarlet, like Scarlett O'Hara, because she had kittens inside the building that was burning. And she went in, even getting her own fur and skin singed by the fire to rescue her kittens. And so that we do see those amazing acts of compassion, but it often is for beings that they have attachment to, that they have some closeness to. But we also have animals, of course, that can be trained to be support animals, service animals that can rescue people in, avalanches and things like that. It's certainly wonderful if we can give animals a chance to make some virtue, create some virtue. Again, that's not possible with most animals because they're simply don't have that concept. They're kind of blocked from that. Let's go on to the next verse about animals. The next verse is stated with regard to specific types of animal suffering. Some die for the sake of pearls or wool, bones, flesh, or skin. Other helpless ones are exploited with the blows of kicking, fists, whips, hooks, and prods. So some animals are killed for pearls, some for wool, and some, such as elephants, for their bones. I guess they meaning there primarily their tusks, right? Elephant tusks are quite valuable on the black market. Some wild deer, for example, are killed for their flesh, and some, such as leopards, for their skins. Other animals, the helpless property of gods and men, such as the horse, buffalo, donkey, elephant, and ox, suffer the misery of exploitation, being struck with kicks, fists, whips, hooks, and prods. So again, this is something to kind of recall about animals is the fact that they are made servants and doing work that humans won't do. I mean, even always kind of depressed to see the yaks that have to carry all of the loads up to places in the Himalayan region where people go on pilgrimage and what have you. I think they get treated perhaps a little bit better than some of the animals who are beasts of burden, but nonetheless, it's not an easy life, right? This is the lot of animals very often is to be made subject to the whims of humans who own them. And of course, many of them are killed for their flesh. This is certainly something we see around the world. So it's something just to keep in mind that the realm of animals is another place of great misery, not as prolonged certainly as it is in some of the hell realms and even the realms of the pretas, the hungry ghosts that we're going to go to next. As I think I mentioned this last week, these three lower rebirths are sometimes in a different order. Sometimes they say the hells are the worst, then the hungry ghosts, and then the animals. And I think they say that in relation to the fact that it's generally lesser suffering in regard to that. This presentation with animals before the hungry ghosts, I think, is made, I've heard, because of the ability for some hungry ghosts to actually generate some more virtuous states of mind and what have you. So there's like a little bit more cognitive ability at the hungry ghost level than there is at an animal level. So that's why that we're getting the presentation in this order. So again, the hungry ghosts or pretas are these beings who have created an experience that is often said to be related to miserliness or greed, just like the animals are related to ignorance, like I said earlier, and the hell beings to anger. If we've had a life of grasping at all of our possessions and not wanting to let them go or give them away to others to share them, then this is the type of karma we're creating, is to have a life where we're essentially bereft of the minimal things that are needed to keep us alive, which are food and water. And there are many other forms of suffering there, but that's the main one. So let's start our little survey of the hungry ghosts by taking a look at this first verse where we talk about the general suffering of the pretas, the hungry ghosts. Among the pretas, there is constant suffering caused by lack of material things. They undergo most terrible misery created by fear, anguish, hunger, thirst, cold, and heat. So it says, in short, one who is born a preta must undergo incessant misery caused by a total lack of material things. The term incessant means specifically that since there is no opportunity of obtaining material things, such suffering cannot be alleviated. And this is the main suffering they experience, is that they are blocked in terms of being able to receive food and drink. Now we're going to look at some of the more specific ones, but I might mention that in the traditional texts, they always talk about three ways that beings have obstacles to it kind of partaking of food and drink. The first one is the pretas that have an external obstacle. In other words, they might see something from a distance that looks like something delicious that they could eat, but when they get there, it's turned into something, nauseating and awful, and putrid. There are those with the internal obstacles, meaning that from their own side, anything that they try to put into their mouths, they have obstacles in terms of being able to swallow it, or even if they're able to swallow it, it becomes burning fire as it goes down their very, very narrow throats. And then there are the third, those pretas who have obstacles within the food and drink. So the food and drink itself actually changes into something, again, that would be not beneficial for them, that they cannot really partake of. So whether it's something external, something internal, or the food and drink itself sort of transforming into something that would be, again, not what they were anticipating, not what they need. So let's take a look then at the continuing commentary on this verse. One may ask what particular manner of suffering this is. It is the extremely terrible misery created by hunger, thirst, cold in winter, and heat in summer. They experience things the opposite that we do. For them, the sun is cold and the moon is hot. They experience cold in winter and heat in summer, similar to us, but they do have these other opposite kind of reactions to sunlight and moonlight. So again, there's some of their sufferings are similar to ours, but some of them are actually said to be quite different. It is the anguish brought on by rushing about in search of food and drink, and the fear inspired at the sight of persons wielding swords and the like. Now, in demonstration of the specific types of suffering, the following verse addresses those of hunger and thirst. Quite specifically, this is again the main suffering they deal with. Some with needle eye mouths and stomachs the size of mountains are tortured by hunger, but unable to eat even the smallest quantity of discarded filth. So they have these needle eye mouths and necks, but then they have these huge stomachs. And that's how they're depicted often. We did talk a little bit at the end of last week. I might take it off screen for just a moment about how many of these beings are sort of humanoid, if you will. Like when we talk about in the hell realms that you're getting your arms, severed or whatever, and so in your head, and so it sounds like it's very much based on a humanoid form. But I was thinking about that question afterwards, and actually, even the Buddhas though are humanoid, right? They some of them have more heads and more arms and what have you, but the same basic physiology is there of a torso, the upper limbs, the lower limbs, the head, what have you. So I don't know what that means. I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, when we start talking about life in other worlds or what have you, would it look humanoid? I don't know. Is this just meant to be a way of relating to us as humans to be able to get our heads around what these experiences would be like? What form you would have in these realms. It's spelled out here in the Lam Rim, but I don't know. I'm just speculating that perhaps this is just a way of driving it home to us because we can relate to a body like that, right? We can understand what it would be like to have a neck that is needle thin. Not that we have a one now, but we could kind of imagine that because we have heads and necks and what have you, or to have a belly that is like a huge mountain. So again, this is what we're dealing with in these descriptions. They're often, again, very based on human forms, but we don't necessarily have to take that as a given that all these beings would necessarily have that. I think I don't know. And it says even it being so difficult to fill a stomach the size of a mountain when one has a mouth as small as the eye of a needle, these pretas are tormented by hunger, right? Because you can't even get enough to begin filling up a stomach that large. Even should they find the slightest amount of filth which someone has discarded, like urine or excrement, they are powerless to eat it because their mouths are so small, and again, their necks as well. The following verse describes the unattractiveness of Preta's bodies and the fact that their mouths blaze with fire. This apparently is another major type of rebirth there that is said to be quite painful. When I was on retreat, I was listening to some of Rinpoche's teachings from Kopan that he gave during the pandemic, and he talks about how this is one of the sufferings that's bad. But he actually says one of the worst Preta rebirths is when they're born with knots in their necks so that they can't even get food down at all. But anyway, this sounds pretty horrific as well. Some are naked, mere skin and bones, like that should say bones, not hones, like the dried top of a palm tree. Others have mouths which blaze at night. For food, they eat sand which falls into their mouths. So the bodies of some pretas have no flesh and are thus merely skin and bones. They have no clothing, so are naked, and their appearance is like that of the top of a palm tree, dried up and stripped of its bark. Some emit fire from their mouths each night, though not during the day, and hot sand which falls into their mouths serves as food. It sounds pretty horrific to be eating hot sand. The next verse illustrates the particular sufferings of the lowlier classes of pretas. Several lowly class pretas cannot find even such filth as pus, excrement, blood, or the like. They attack one another, eating pus from festered goiters growing in the throat. I mean, their whole existence sounds pretty disgusting. Some pretas are of an inferior class, which is to say that they have extremely poor fortune. They are unable to find even pus, excrement, blood, or other such kinds of filth, much less something appetizing. Yet when they catch sight of one another, each becomes angered and attacks the other, striking him with a club. They contract goiters of the throat, which become festered, and then for sustenance eat the pus which oozes from them. Sorry, it's getting kind of descriptive here, and again, pretty grossed out. The following verse is stated to illustrate several additional types of suffering these pretas experience. In summer, even the moon feels hot for them, while in winter the sun feels cold. Under their mere gaze, trees turn empty of fruit and rivers become dry. So in the summer season, even the moon causes a feeling of burning heat for this lowly class of pretas, while in the winter, even the sun makes them feel cold. Such is their misery of heat and cold. Further, even trees filled with ripe and luscious fruit, their branches drooping beneath the weight, appear to be dry and empty of fruit at their mere gaze. So even though it might kind of be there to be experienced, but they have an obstacle to seeing it and being able to kind of partake of it as delicious fruit. Instead, it's all kind of dried up, you know. And it says, rivers, though filled with waters having the 8 excellent qualities, appear dry or filled instead with burning slag and great quantities of worm-infested filth. Okay. Now, how long do they experience this suffering? And what is the duration of a life in the Preta realm? In the Hell realms, they're unbelievably long. We saw that earlier. Undergoing incessant suffering and tightly bound by the karmic fetters of misdeeds, some do not die for 5,000 or even 10,000 years. This is human years that we're talking about. So incessant means that these beings undergo constant suffering. Some who live out their lives fully do not die for 5,000 or even 10,000 human years, despite being unable to acquire food and drink, etc., because they are tightly bound by the karmic fetters of wrongdoing. So again, it's not like we were talking about in the hell realms, where a being can be cut up and what have you, and all this suffering happen, and you experience it continually. It's not like then you die and that's over. You know, the body gets reconstituted, or you have experienced a different additional suffering, what have you. For the pretas, it's very similar. Although they continually are experiencing hunger and thirst, their body never really dies from that hunger and thirst. It just becomes this gnawing pain that they have all the time. I might talk a little bit here, and I don't know much about what is really, going on because I'm just not that informed when it comes down to it. But I think that this is what we often are referring to as ghosts, the spirits that might be kind of in this plane between the hungry ghost realm and the human realm. I think that these types of beings that are being described could be beings that have an ability to manifest to some people, to be seen as a kind of a paranormal phenomena in this world. But that's just my guess. I don't know. I've never heard a Tibetan teacher absolutely say that. We do often talk in Tibetan terms, though, about spirit harm, where there are spirits, ghosts, what have you, who occupy particular realms, places where they have a strong attachment to. And they have a totally different experience of it because their karma is completely different. You know, there's that kind of analogy where they talk about emptiness, essentially, about how things are being seen differently by different beings depending upon their karma. And in this analogy, they take a glass of fluid. And in human terms, we'd be seeing it as a glass of water, right? Because get it from the tap and we put it on the table, it's a glass of water for us. If gods were there, and we're going to talk about the gods of the desire realm shortly, they would have a totally different karma. That substance that appears as water to us could appear as ambrosia, nectar for the gods, because they have a karma through their virtue they've created to have much more delightful experiences of substances. They don't experience something as base as ordinary water. They would experience ambrosia. But if a hungry ghost came into the room and was seeing that same glass of fluid, it would appear as pus and blood for them, or some disgusting substance, right? So again, this is what essentially the karma of these beings is that they have this experience. It keeps going on, even though their bodies become, so hungry and thirsty and what have you. They never die from that hunger or thirst. They die when the karma for that rebirth is exhausted, and then they go on to another existence. And of course, hungry ghosts don't create a lot of virtue. I guess there's a possibility of them attaining some virtue, but they will probably go on to another unfortunate rebirth. Maybe at some point they will actually enter into a higher rebirth. Certainly, we've all been in those realms of existence, and here we are in the human realm now. So it's nothing permanent, again, nothing eternal. So the next introduction to verse 97 says, "You may ask, what causes one's experience of this suffering? The case for the preta's single taste of such diverse suffering is a being's delight in parsimony, stinginess. Buddha declared miserliness to be ignoble. You know, miserliness is not something that is very reputable, right? It's dishonorable to not give what we have to others. That's the mind of self-cherishing and self-grasping that's tightening around all of our possessions and not wanting to share them. So it's not something we should be engaging in. We should be attentive to the need to be generous with what we have. So all the various types of misery, Venerable Randawa says, which pretas experience, the above mentioned, hunger, thirst, and so on, are identical in that they constitute suffering. Thus they are said to be of a single taste. They are a single taste for in suffering terms, and them all being the suffering, the suffering of misery. Their cause is a delight in parsimony, habitual stinginess. Moreover, the Buddha has declared this miserliness to be ignoble, meaning that it is a powerful non-virtue. The Samchayagata states a miser will be born in the preta state, or if born a human, then as a pauper. So this is the other kind of mistake we make around miserliness, is that if we don't be generous, if we're not generous with what we have, we're not creating the causes to have resources when we are born human. When we look at the world we live in, there are many people, many human beings living without the resources they need to sustain their lives, and often even dying from hunger and thirst, great famine in parts of this world. Those are all karmic consequences. And it sounds, I'm not trying to make this like cold in any way. We should be generating incredible compassion for the beings who have to experience this type of suffering. But it is a product of their own lack of generosity, their own holding tight to their material possessions, or not helping others, not doing things that are acts of generosity. So it's important, if we are going to get a good human rebirth, one with all the resources that we need to use it well, that we actually practice generosity on the positive side, to be able to acquire resources that we will then need to not just sustain our own lives, but to help others. If you don't have many resources, it's hard to be generous. You can still be generous through your thoughts. Master Shantideva says that in his Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. Even if you're a renunciate, a monk, nun, and you don't own anything, you can still be generous, because you can give away while you're eating your meager food. You can have thoughts of giving it away to others, right? You don't necessarily have to be giving it to others in person with the actual substance going from one hand to the other. It's the intention to give that we're increasing. So we give to the ability that we can, but if we do have resources, it's important that we find ways to share those with others, especially those who are in need. Though again, keep in mind that also we have our gurus, who are amazing objects of virtue for us, and generosity towards our gurus is a way to also create very, very powerful merit. But obviously, the field of suffering, besides the field of excellence, all those, gurus and what have you, the field of suffering is also a field that we need to be attentive to. wherever there are beings that are experiencing difficulties, problems, parts of the world where there's great suffering, it's very important that we respond to that. Um, so that's the pretas, that's the hungry ghosts. And there's more in the Lamrim text about them to some degree, but that gives you an idea. Now we move to the upper realms. And we're not going to see the realms of humans being talked about. They are the next one going up. So after the pretas or animals, depending upon the order, we enter into the upper realms. And the first of the three upper realms is the human realm. The human realm has all the sufferings we talked about at the beginning of this section when we went through the six faults, that we have to experience things that we don't like, be separated from what we do like. And of course, there's aging and death and birth and all the various things, illness. We know the sufferings of humans because we're living them in our lives, not constantly, but often enough to really get it. So this is the deities, meaning the gods. This is the sixth of these realms. The demigods are going to come next. They're usually the fifth. But the deities are at the highest of the desire realm. And it says, greater than the pleasures of celestial beings is the suffering of their passing away. Having considered that, the righteous do not crave for the transitory celestial realms. The biggest suffering we can talk about, because these realms are quite elevated in terms of the kind of pleasurable experiences that go on there. You've created unbelievable karma to have delicious, delightful stuff all around you. As I was saying earlier, that glass of fluid is going to appear to you as ambrosia. That's your experience of everything. All the sense pleasures are all delightful for the gods of the desire realm. They do quarrel with the demigods. We're going to talk about the demigods shortly. But their biggest suffering happens mentally when they get into their last 7 days of their life, that last week, which of course a day of a god is much longer than a day in the human realm. These last 7 days, they begin to experience a diminishment of their luster and their beauty. And we're going to read about that shortly. And that is said to be one of the most painful things to go through. Not so much, there is a physical pain to it, but it's the mental anguish. Imagine if you were born to something that is kind of like a heaven realm. If I look at the teachings from some of the other traditions, Christianity, what have you, about a heaven, it's very much like this. It's a realm where you're born and everything seems quite beautiful and you don't really have grosser forms of suffering. But then to have it like come to an end, to realize that this isn't an eternity of heaven. This is actually only once more a karmic result that only has so much energy behind it. And when that energy ceases, then you go through this decline and you exit from that life with unbelievable sorrow. So the mental anguish that you experience there is said to be greater in many ways than what you experience in any other realm, even the lower realms where you experience such physical suffering. So let's look at what is said here. It says, although there is great pleasure consisting of delights of the senses in the celestial realms of the desire gods, the suffering which occurs on the occasion of their passing away surpasses this pleasure by far. As the scripture explains, alas, the garden of varied chariots, alas, the gently flowing river, alas, deities so beautiful of mind, crying thus, they fall to earth. Maybe they come to earth. It's hard to say where they go to, but they fall from that upper realm and have to experience that unbelievable suffering, that what they thought they could rely upon is going to be taken away from them, this beautiful heaven-like realm. Then it says, with such contemplation, the righteous, those with insight and understanding, do not crave for the pleasures of the celestial realms, because even this pleasure ultimately comes to an end, therefore having no lasting value. So this again is pointing to, we often talk about this being part of what we refer to as the suffering or dukkha of change, that all the pleasurable things that we experience don't satisfy and don't last. You might get into a realm like this and might think this sounds like a pretty good place to hang out in samsara, but it's not going to last forever. It will change. And in those last 7 days, when you experience that change, and the garlands of flowers that have been eternally, seemingly eternally beautiful and delightful start wilting. And the body that you have that is seemingly pure starts to smell and begin to rot. And all of these things happen. And essentially, you realize that there was no reliability in that happiness of samsara. This is the nature of this second type of suffering. The suffering of suffering is what you experience in a lot of these other realms. The suffering of change is what you experience in any happiness in any of the realms. Any moment of happiness, even a cool breeze in a hell realm, is unsatisfactory. It doesn't last. It's only temporary. It will change. And all these wonderful delights and pleasures that the beings of the God realms have will come to an end without a doubt. So, Venerable Randawa says, how is it, one may ask, that deities experience suffering at the time of death if they take birth miraculously and do not suffer any mortal injury? A rebirth in the God realm is said to be miraculous or spontaneous. It's not like you become a baby in the womb of a goddess in the God realm and then they give birth to you. You know, you just immediately are born there and you don't suffer any mortal injury. Nothing can kill you in that life. You just eventually die due to the exhaustion of the karma. So then he says, the following verse illustrates that although there is no physical suffering, deities experience extremely great mental suffering when confronted with premonitions of their death. So the first of these, first verse 99 says, the body's complexion turns unattractive. One feels dislike for one's seat, the kind of God cushion that you've been sitting on, living your life on. Garlands wilt, clothing assumes an odor, and the body is soiled as never before. These are the 5 premonitions attending death in the celestial realms. They arise for deities in a way similar to signs of death attending humans on earth who are about to die, right? If you have humans that die in a gradual death, there is a sort of a diminishment of the kind of luster and beauty of the body to some degree. Not with all humans, obviously, but there is a diminishment that is there. Definitely, it happened with my father, and we attended to him when he passed away some years ago. And you do get soiled much more easily. Things do stop functioning and what have you. The body obviously is on its decline and moving. The consciousness eventually going to be separated from the body, and the body simply being a corpse. And it's a similar type of process, not identical in the God realms. It's just pointing out that we can kind of see the imprints of that, if you will, or something that's a shadow of that in the human realm. So let's look at the commentary from Venerable Randawa on this. As a deity approaches the time of death, his body's beautiful complexion fades and becomes unattractive. He begins to dislike sitting upon his divan, and his decorative flower garlands start to wilt. So all these kinds of adornments of the gods that they live with, these naturally beautiful things, are not permanent. They're not unchanging. They are starting to change and diminish in their luster. His clothing assumes an odor, and the body becomes soiled, which had never occurred before. These 5 events are premonitions of signs accompanying the death of deities in the celestial realms, and their occurrence brings great unhappiness. They are like the signs of the nose contracting and the smell of yama, which attend the death of humans on the earth. So again, we see some reflection of it in the way humans pass away, but they say because you've lived your life with these unbelievable pleasures and like feeling like this is it, I've attained it, and I'm in a blissful state, but it doesn't last. And they say what's interesting is that all the other gods will shun the gods that are starting to go through this process. They don't want to see it. Of course, we also see this in the human realm, right? A lot of people don't want to be around death and dying. As soon as they see someone who is passing away, who is heading in that direction, it's like, bye, I'm out of here, and don't want to be reminded of that, right? So we have, again, maybe another lesson there that we can learn in terms of how we approach death in the human realm. But the mental suffering that goes on in the God realms is so great because these beings thought that this was actually what they were going to continue to experience. So, suffering of this kind, accompanying their passing away, is not the only suffering that deities experience. The following verse states that subsequent to their deaths, they are faced with the suffering of the evil states, meaning that they have premonitions of their impending descent into a lower realm. If after passing away from the divine realm there is no remaining virtue, if you've exhausted all that virtue by simply taking rebirth in such an idyllic state, one will helplessly enter the state of an animal, preta, or hell being. This is one of the biggest sufferings too, right? Is that they kind of, if they can see, oh my gosh, all of this merit was utilized just to have this blissful experience that was just transitory and didn't produce anything. Because gods can produce some virtue. It said that the Buddha himself taught in one of the god realms where his mother Maya, Queen Maya, had passed away and been reborn into that realm. The We have the four main special Buddha days we celebrate every year. By the way, next Thursday being Sakadawa, the big one that commemorates three events in the life of the Buddha: the birth, enlightenment, and parinirvana of the Buddha. But there is one that we usually experience have sometime in October or November. That's called the descent from the realm of the 33. The realm of the 33 is one of the god realms, again, where Queen Maya was born. And like a week before that, the Buddha went there, ascended to the god realm of the 33. And then we celebrate him returning back, descending back to be in this world to continue teaching, which he did for, I don't know, some years after that event. So you can get some virtue and some knowledge in the God realms, but usually you're so intoxicated by pleasures that you don't make good use of that life. And then you get to the end of that life and you've exhausted all of your merit, and you have to descend into a non-virtue or a lower rebirth due to the non-virtue that is going to ripen at that point, because there's no virtue left to ripen into a good rebirth. Well, maybe not no virtue, but very little virtue. So this is one of the big problems about being in the God realm as well. Let's look at the commentary from Venerable Rendawa. If one who passes away from the celestial realms has no remaining virtue for taking birth in the higher states, powerless to remain in these states, one shall therefore fall into one of the three states of animal, preta, or hell being, and experience its suffering. So that's the consequence of kind of burning off all your good karma in a wonderful, delightful realm like the God realm. The demigods or asuras, and sometimes the gods are called suras, these are asuras. They have a neighboring realm to the gods, so they share a border, if you will. And it says here, asuras, through their natural hostility towards the deity's glory, have great mental suffering. Though intelligent, they cannot see the truth due to their obstruction of their state of being. So they are blocked to having what we call the path of seeing, the direct realization of emptiness. They can learn Dharma to some extent, but they have an obscuration mentally to attaining a deeper realization, and they live their life with great hostility. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention with regard to the gods, what is the affliction that kind of produces a god realm? Pride, the pride of having so much wonderful stuff and what have you. It kind of inflames the beings of that realm as well to some degree, though they don't see it as a fault, right? Because they're very content and happy in what they have. But of course, the demigods, they're looking upon the gods and everything that they have, and they have jealousy. So the demigod realm is a product of jealousy. It's where you are looking at others who have more than you have and being envious of what they possess and wanting to have it yourself. This is why we're always encouraged to rejoice in the good fortune that others have. And if we have good fortune ourselves, not to let it make us conceited. There's no reason to be conceited. We should feel good and rejoice that we created the karma in the past to have good things. But there's a responsibility that comes with that. If we've produced, the karma to have excellent health and good resources and everything else, well, then we have to benefit others with that. Don't just take it for granted and use it for all sorts of, fun things in this human life. Try to diminish our pride and try to rejoice in the good fortune of others. So the demigod realm is definitely a product of that kind of jealousy. And they experience jealousy their whole life, being jealous of what the gods have, and the gods, goddesses, the women, the male demigods crave them and what have you. Anyway, there's lots of bit more detail again in the Lam Rim on these beings. Venerable Rendawa says, because of their great pride, asuras by nature have a great animosity towards the glory of the deities. This intolerance causes them great mental suffering, since jealousy is very discomforting to the mind. When people are inflamed by jealousy, they don't kind of realize how much it just makes them unable to even enjoy what they have, right? If you're always jealous of someone else, and you can't even enjoy what you do possess, or, rejoice in that. These asuras also suffer from doing battle with the deities, at which time their bodies are cut and slashed. I guess the gods always win. The gods are, higher powers, and so the The deities always cause harm to the demigods. And although able to distinguish virtue from evil, they are unable to gain realization of the truth, an obstruction pertaining to all beings of this birth state, which is a unique maturation of their karma. So again, it creates an obstacle to, by realization of the truth, we mean the realization of ultimate truth, of emptiness. The next paragraph, some commentaries state that the Asura birth is one projected by a non-virtuous karma and consummated or completed by virtuous ones. Arya Sangha, however, has declared that because Asuras are beings of a godly form, this state of existence is one projected by a virtuous karma. There are these two different types of karma that we often talk about, and just refreshing people's memory. Those of you who studied this before, you've got projecting karma, which is the karma that takes you to an actual rebirth. But then what completes that birth, what gives kind of fills it out, gives it more features, is your completing karma. So we have four iterations of that. You can have good completing karma and good projecting karma, such as what most of us here possess. We have a good human rebirth and we have ample resources, adequate resources. We're not born with millions of dollars coming out of our eyes or anything, but we're doing okay. All of us are here looking fairly well fed and what have you. Then there is the projecting karma being bad, but the completing karma being good. And that's like our pets, right? Our pets have bad karma in that they've been reborn as an animal, but they have good completing karma because they've been born in a situation where they don't have to be afraid for their life most of the time. And they're getting fed every day and cared for and, again, medical treatment, whatever it is that they need. Then we have the third, which is bad in both ways, bad projecting and bad completing, which would be the animals who are living in the Serengeti plains, who are subject to being preyed upon by wild beasts and what have you. And then we have one where you would have bad, or it would be that we'd have bad completing, but good projecting. And that's where if you're, for example, born as a human, but you have no resources whatsoever, such as, again, what are experienced in many parts of the world where there's great famine and difficulty in eking out any sort of a living, having any of the resources that you need. So again, what we're talking about here is somebody's putting forward the idea that maybe these demigods have a negative projecting karma, but a positive completing karma. And Arya Sangha says, no, 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 this isn't true. The whole thing has got to be positive because essentially they're being born into a God realm. And yes, they do have a life where they are still at odds with others, the deities and what have you, and experiencing other types of suffering. But we would say that they definitely are falling into the category, just like we are, of having good completing as well as good projecting karma. Um, so then it says samsara's faults having thus been explained. Again, we didn't talk specifically about the human realm because I think, again, we know that pretty well. The following concluding verse is stated to engender a feeling of dislike for all of samsara. There are no good places in samsara. So the conclusion, samsara being so, there is no favorable birth, whether among deities, humans, hell beings, pretas, or animals. Birth should be known as a vessel of much harm and much sorrow. So I might throw in here that oftentimes in the God realm, we often include those that are not in the desire realm gods, but in what we call the form and formless realm. And I've talked about those previously, but essentially those are beings who have created a karma due to their meditative concentration. Remember when we went through the four concentrations that have the four respective form realms, and then the four absorptions that have the four respective formless realms? Those two are very blissful and idyllic states in many ways, but they're temporary. They don't last. And this is what the Buddha himself as Prince Siddhartha found when he was on his spiritual quest. And he started investigating meditative techniques with the people he practiced with, these various ascetics and what have you. And he realized that you get to this peak. Remember, we talked about the peak of samsara, peak of psychic existence. You can make the mind very, very refined, but there's still some residual, samsaric garbage there that essentially you cannot be free of. And so these states, while they are very noble and very wonderful to attain, don't lead to any real peace and satisfaction. So we find in the end that all of samsara is just, you know, unacceptable. You know, I used to joke when we were in the master's program, some of us were discussing this whole concept about how maybe most people are okay with the unsatisfactoriness of samsara, or maybe they just haven't seen it to the degree that Buddhists are trying to see it. Maybe Buddhists are just a little more picky. We just want something that's better than all of this. But when you begin to see the faults of samsara in terms of what we are dealing with, it should lead to this level of kind of turning away. And what we've been talking about in this whole section is seeing samsara for what it is. It's not a pleasure grove, folks. It's not a wonderful day at the carnival. It is a trap. It's a prison. And we've been involved in it since beginningless time. And no matter where we go, we are going to experience its unsatisfactoriness. Again, the word the Buddha used in Sanskrit was dukkha, which means dissatisfaction, means, that things they're not okay. And to really get that, I mean, again, most people are kind of, oh, well, that's just the way things are. Oh, people die. That's just the way it is. Well, no, I mean, if the Buddha was simply pointing that out to us with no possibility of attaining freedom from all of that, that would be another story, right? It'd be kind of cruel. But, there's a possibility of something other than this. And that's, of course, nirvana. We're going to talk about that in the next part. And so, again, this is uh, what we're trying to get away from there, or to take away from this, is this last verse. Because samsara is comprised of the faults explained above, there is no birth among any type of beings, whether deities or humans and so on, which is favorable. Birth should be understood as the vessel or basis of many types of harm, such as the harm of close relations and so forth, the harm of having people we're close to that we have to be separated from, and all of the various other things, right? So now we go to the next section where it says pursuance of the path, having contemplated nirvana's virtues. So again, the Buddha taught nirvana, that there is freedom from all of this that we actually can attain. So now we have two chapters within this that are being set out. The first being that which is common to all vehicles, kind of what we are talking about in terms of nirvana and the ability to attain it, that would be appropriate to meditate on in regard to all the vehicles the Buddha taught, the three vehicles of the two of the Hinayana, the hearers and solitary realizers, and then, excuse me, the one of the Mahayana, the bodhisattvas. So the first of this chapter's two sections illustrates that nirvana has virtues that make it an object which ought to be attained. By the way, I might point out with regard to the Mahayana, it's not our final goal to attain simply nirvana. What we want to attain, I may have mentioned this term before, is non-abiding nirvana. Those who are on the hearer and solitary realizer path, these two Hinayana paths, they attain the state of an arhat and their own personal nirvana. But they kind of are narrower in their perspective, because when they check out of this round of existence, when they die, leaving behind the body that they had when they attained that state, they abide in a solitary peace. For the bodhisattvas, this is kind of a forbidden. This is not where you want to go. You don't want to end up in solitary peace, because that's simply wasting a lot of time when you could be a benefit to other beings. So when we talk about Buddhahood, the bodhisattva path, they want to attain this state of non-abiding nirvana, meaning it's not abiding in samsara. They are free of samsara. They have attained their own nirvana, but it's also not abiding in the nirvana that's a solitary peace. So they see both of those as anathema. I don't want to be in samsara. Samsara is disgusting. Thank you very much. But I also don't want to end up in solitary peace, because that's going to be antithetical to what I want to do in helping sentient beings. Beings who check out into that state of solitary peace from the state of arhatship, they essentially don't have any ability to help others. That's why they have to be called back into the Mahayana path at a later point, after that karma is kind of exhausted to some degree, and they bring them into the Mahayana path to complete their path all the way to enlightenment, which I'm always amazed that beings can do this, because they've already done so much work and they have to do a whole lot more work than to kind of complete the Mahayana. But this is why it's better to enter the Mahayana right from the very beginning, so we don't waste time, because sentient beings need our help. We want to be free ourselves, but moreover, we want to be able to help others to attain this state of peace. So that's the logic behind that. I just wanted to explain that before we go too far into this. But nirvana is something that we nonetheless should strive to attain. But for bodhisattvas and bodhisattva wannabes like ourselves, we want to attain this non-abiding nirvana. Okay, the following verse is stated as an inspiration to strive for nirvana once one has generated, as explained above, a genuine dissatisfaction for the world. That's what we talked about in that whole previous section, the last few classes. Even if one's head or clothing should suddenly catch fire, one should forego extinguishing it and exert oneself rather in putting an end to rebirth. No aim is more exalted than that. We even use this phrase sometimes, like practice like your hair is on fire. I think we've all heard that phrase one time or another. But the idea here is that your hair on fire, your head on fire, compared to the sufferings of samsara, there's no comparison. Your hair being on fire is just really minor compared to the sufferings of the realms of samsara. We'd be better off putting our attention there than extinguishing the fire that's been lit on our hair. Now, again, I don't think that it's meant to be taken completely literally. Sure, extinguish the fire if you have the ability to do that, but it's emphasizing the importance of doing something that's much more meaningful rather than simply attending to alleviating to some degree the sufferings that we experience in this realm. Yeah. And of course, in the Mahayana tradition, you have ways of working with the sufferings of this realm, the Lojong teachings, which we won't be going into as part of this text, but know that that's something that we get teachings on frequently. I'm not sure what Geshe Sherab will be teaching on when he comes back and what have you, but there's always some Lojong somewhere in there. And Lojong is where we take the sufferings we experience and we channel them into all of these various states of mind, into renunciation, into an understanding of the suffering of others, whatever. We make sure that we don't waste those experiences and simply just try to alleviate our suffering, put out the fire. Yes, certainly, do what you can to alleviate it, but that while you are working with it, you can actually do some amazing things to change your mind. All the sufferings that we experiencing of aging, illness, and so on, all of them can be transformed into the path. So anyway, I just thought I would point that out as well. But let's read what the commentary is on this verse about, attending to being free from the sufferings of samsara rather than putting out the fire in your head. If one's head or clothing were suddenly to catch fire, one would quickly attempt to put out the blaze, as it would destroy both life and limb. Yet a wise man, knowing samsara is false, would abandon any effort to extinguish the fire and would instead, without regard for life or limb, strive to put an end to rebirth. This is because there is no higher purpose for an individual than bringing an end to rebirth. So that's where our attention should go. It's not to say again, don't do anything, let your head burn or whatever. I don't think it's really the intent of it. It's just saying, look at what we're doing when we are tending to alleviating the sufferings of this life, when there's much bigger sufferings to be dealt with, bigger fish to fry, as they say, though I don't really like that phrase. But how can the termination of rebirth be achieved? The following verse is stated to illustrate that it is achieved by means of the three precious trainings. Through morality, wisdom, and dhyana, or concentration, one must achieve nirvana, the immaculate state of peace and subdual. Remember, these three, we've encountered them before, and they're usually taught in the middle scope of the Lamrim. The foundation of morality, then the second one is usually concentration, jhana, and then wisdom. These are the three higher trainings. And in the Mahayana, they are also there. They are just accompanied by bodhicitta and other practices. But that's the means to attaining nirvana. First, subduing your behavior, and then subduing your mind through concentration, and then subduing the afflictions completely through wisdom. Ageless, deathless, eternal, and free of earth, water, fire, air, sun, and moon. So this is describing the state of nirvana, meaning it's not something that will change. It's eternal. We never kind of part from that, and so on. Anyway, we'll see the description in the commentary coming up. In short, nirvana is achieved by means of the three trainings, or often again called the three higher trainings, because many people train in these. They just don't train in the higher training to attain the goal of nirvana. The morality, wisdom, and jhana previously mentioned, again, usually in the order of morality, concentration, or jhana, and wisdom. Nirvana is twofold, that which is without remainder and that which has remainder. Let's talk about this briefly. I mean, there are different presentations of this concept of with remainder and without remainder. What do we mean by remainder? Well, in this presentation, the remainder is the aggregates. So when I was mentioning these arhats, attain the state of arhatship. They remove the final layer of the afflictive obstructions that are keeping them bound in samsara. They become purified of that, but they still have a body, right? Because that body was created by the karma they created coming into that life, and they will have that body until that body ceases to function. So essentially, they have a remainder. This is the term that's used for it. So they've attained nirvana. They have that peace. They've done everything that needs to be done. They've removed all of the afflictive obscurations. Again, they haven't gone on to the path of removing the subtler obscurations that bodhisattvas do, but they've removed everything that keeps them bound in samsara. So they've attained nirvana, but it's with remainder, still has a body. When they die out of that life, that consciousness exits that life, they are then without remainder because there is no remainder of the body there remaining. So they go on in a state of solitary peace. Their minds continue. There were some lower traditions of Buddhism that taught that mind was extinguished at that point, like putting out the flame of a candle. But in the Mahayana teachings, it's no such thing. Your mind continues. You cannot stop mind. Mind is continually arising from prior moments of mind, each mind giving rise to the next moment of mind. Even a mind of an arhat that is free of the afflictive obscurations is going to continue on. And that being, again, will abide in that solitary peace, in a nirvana without remainder, and eventually be called into the Mahayana. So these are the two different nirvanas that are being talked about here, whether you still have a body, even though you've attained that complete freedom, or whether you're without that body and have, left that body behind and are abiding in that state of freedom. So there are qualities, of course, attached to this. The first of them, the one without remainder, is called peace, because all the impure aggregates have terminated, right? You no longer have any impure aggregates because you left them behind at the end of that life where you attained arhatship. The second, that which has remainder, is called subdual because it constitutes the subdual of the facilities, meaning that you don't have the mind that will generate any kind of affliction in regard to whatever you have yet to experience with that body until you pass away. Since they are both free of the turbidness of the mental afflictions, they are immaculate. And so in the verse earlier, let me put it a little bit further up on the screen. It said, nirvana, the immaculate state of peace and subdual. So peace is when you have no remainder, subdual is when you still have remainder, but they're both immaculate. And it says they're immaculate because, again, they're free of the turbidness, the agitation of the mental afflictions. One becomes ageless because the process of aging no longer occurs, and deathless because one's vital force is no longer subject to change. Nirvana is eternal because it is forever interminable. Will never come to an end. You will continue to experience that forever. So, as to distinguish this liberation from what several non-Buddhists claim has the color of snow, of a conch shell, curds, fog, or a pearl, and the shape of a white parasol, the verse states that one should achieve the state free of earth, water, fire, air, and the sun and moon. I actually found this a little puzzling when I first saw it, and then I found in a commentary, and I actually forgot to pull this up on a slide. Maybe I'll get it ready for you in just one moment. We're doing okay time-wise, so let me pull the slide up real quick. Sorry, I meant to pull that up earlier. It'll only take a minute. There was another commentary by Kensur Kangyo Rinpoche, and in that he gives an explanation of what this is about. So let me pull that up now. I've got it on my screen. I just need to share my screen. Optical device, there we go. Okay, so this is on the nature of nirvana. This is what Kensur or Kyabje Kangyo Rinpoche, I'm sorry, it's in Kensur, it's Kyabje, I think. Some non-Buddhists assert that liberation has material form And this is actually a verse, I'm not sure where this verse comes from, but it seems to be of the Jain tradition. The founder of the Jain religion has set forth something like this about liberation or moksha. He says it's like snow, like a conch shell, white shell, like incense smoke, like curd or cows or pearls, its hue, and like a white umbrella, white parasol is its shape. Such is liberation, the Jainics has explained, the founder of the Jains. So apparently there is some tradition in India that explained a state of liberation to have a physical form, like what was described there. And then Kyabji Kanga Rinpoche says, but Nagarjuna shows that liberation is not as they claim. In order to refute liberation with a shape, and to help those who believe in earth, water, fire, wind, the sun, and moon as sources of refuge to give up such beliefs, he says, attain freedom from the belief in the sun and moon as a refuge. I don't know all of what that's about, but some explanation. But in our verse, we definitely saw that this was being put forward as a way of refuting views that were held at the time that don't think that nirvana is a physical thing with shape or color or what have you. It's a mental state. And when we talk about nirvana, it's not a place even, right? We're not talking about, well, I'm in samsara now, and then I want to be in nirvana, some idyllic place out there somewhere. You can experience nirvana in this world by pacifying your own mind. And the bodhisattvas who do that, they attain that state but continue to work on removing the subtler obscurations. They have a completely pacified mind while abiding in this world that is conditioned and what have you. They just don't experience any of the suffering or difficulties or agitation of that world. So nirvana has this amazing quality to it, but it's a state of mind, just like samsara, we can say, is a state of mind. We don't necessarily think that samsara is the physical stuff out there. It's a product, certainly, of our minds, but it's our minds is what's in samsara, and it's our minds that will be in the state of nirvana. Now, going on to the next section, we have the instruction for the pursuance of the collection of causes for nirvana. This is the whole second part of this outline. Remember, this outline is kind of giving us this desire to move in this direction, to attain the state of nirvana, having looked at samsara and seen it for what it is. Now we're going to look at this kind of what are the causes? What will help us to attain this? We spelled them out in brief by saying the higher trainings, right? But moreover, it has other elements involved to it, all right? This section has, moreover, 7 parts, of which the first concerns the 7 limbs of enlightenment or 7 branches of enlightenment. The following verse is stated to demonstrate the dharmas which, when achieved, produce the attainment of nirvana. So these 7 limbs of enlightenment, it's kind of interesting. Way back in verse 45, and I won't put that on the screen because I'd have to go all the way back, but verse 45 was putting forward these 5 powers or 5 strengths. And we're going to see them kind of repeated, except for the first one. The first one was faith. The other 4 are repeated here. Because again, what happens is we start developing as you become either a hearer, solitary realizer, or bodhisattva, you enter into the first of the 5 paths. That is the path of accumulation, where you start accumulating more and more of the positive energy and wisdom, merit, what have you, that you need to advance to the next level. That's the path of preparation, where you prepare for the direct insight into emptiness that happens on the path of seeing, which I mentioned earlier. Remember, the demigods are obscured to having the path of seeing. But for a practitioner, there are, these various powers that they develop on these 2 levels, especially on the path of preparation. These become very powerful on the first 2 of the 4 levels of the path of preparation, become even stronger on the last 2. And then they become the force by which you enter into the path of seeing. And in a single session of meditative equipoise, where you go into deep meditation on emptiness, and it's conceptual when you go in, when you enter into that meditation, it becomes non-conceptual. And so these are the powers that are behind that ability to have that direct insight. Because essentially, that direct insight into emptiness is what will help you to achieve nirvana. You achieve it for the first time on the path of seeing, again, having prepared for it and accumulated the necessary merit and so on. Then you go on to what's called the path of meditation, or we might refer to it more accurately as the path of familiarization, where you continue to meditate on emptiness, having similar experiences, but each time removing another layer of garbage in our minds, another layer of obscurations. And you finally get to the subtlest levels of those, and you become a Buddha on what's called the path of no more learning. So it's all laid out as to what we have to do, but the main tool for attaining the state of nirvana for the hearers and solitary realizers is the insight into emptiness. And for that to happen, in a non-conceptual way, we need these seven powers to be effective in our minds, these seven forces. Again, they're called here the branches or limbs of enlightenment. Now, the bodhisattvas also have these same seven, but they, of course, are uniting things with their bodhicitta and other practices and so on. So let's go through them. And by the way, I might mention I'll maybe have send this to John and Sarah, and they can get it sent out to you. I did put together a little chart that is a replica of a chart that's in Geshe Sopa's book. Many of you have this book. Um, I recommended it at the beginning of the class, but if you've been following along, it's really quite nice. But there is an appendix 5, that's on pages 361 and 362, that talks about these seven branches or limbs and goes into kind of a kind of detail in regard to them. And let me see if I'm going to go ahead and pull that up on the screen. I forgot to do that too. I just got back from things earlier today and I just simply didn't. Oh, I think I did pull it up. I'm sorry, I did. So it's there. Let me go ahead and show it then. I'll put it on the screen so you can see that. This is a chart that is the seven branches or limbs of the path to enlightenment. Let me go through them really briefly. We have first the branch of mindfulness or recollection. It's called different things in different texts, which means to continuously recollect your object, recollecting what you have heard, which in this case is the object of emptiness, ultimate truth. Then I'm not going to go through the ones in the other side yet of the chart because I just want to introduce these to you. The second one is ascertainment, or in some texts called discernment of phenomena. This is the actual wisdom that distinguishes between the way things appear and their ultimate nature. In other words, the wisdom seeing emptiness. So wisdom is a second factor after mindfulness. The third branch is diligence or effort. This is the assiduous pursuit of virtuous actions to achieve your goal. You need some kind of force behind it, some effort, enthusiasm. Joy, this is the happiness due to practice on the path of seeing. They say it's a very joyful experience. Not joy in the way that we might know it and through our very limited conditioned way of experiencing things. It's a joy that arises from the experience of that wisdom. It's the benefit of your meditation practice. Then there's great agility or pliancy, the fifth one. This is the flexibility of the body and mind so that you can practice as long as you wish. This is achieved when you attain calm abiding and carried forward in your deeper concentrations. But it means that you're very serviceable. The body and mind can be used for the pursuit of virtue as you wish. And meditative concentration, number 6, right? Makes sense that that is there, the single pointed concentration without distraction of dullness or excitement. We need to have that as a basis, a support, right? And then equanimity, a balanced amount of effort in maintaining concentration. I might point out that equanimity here is not the equanimity of seeing all beings without having attachment for friends and hatred towards enemies. This is equanimity that means a balanced state where you are not being kind of taken away from that. You are able to abide in that state of meditative concentration. So those are what we're going to be looking at in this section. And we have an introduction to them first. Whoops, I'm sorry. How did I do that? First in the verse 106. Recollection or mindfulness, the discernment of dharmas, secondly, effort, third, joy, fourth, extreme agility, fifth, samadhi or concentration, meditative stabilization, whatever, that's sixth, and equanimity. These 7 are the limbs of enlightenment, the collection of virtues bringing about nirvana's attainment. Recollection or mindfulness means not forgetting the objects of attention, the truths, and in particular, not just all the 4 noble truths, the truth that is ultimate truth, that is the object seen by the path of seeing. Wisdom or prajna is a thorough discernment of dharmas. Effort is delight in virtue, while joy is a state of mental satisfaction towards the same, towards virtue. Extreme agility is a fitness of body and mind. Sixth is samadhi, meditative concentration itself. Equanimity is a natural and relaxed state in which mental dimness and excitation are absent, right? So you can just be in that balanced state. Furthermore, all of these should be understood as occurring upon the occasion of the path of seeing. Again, the initial direct realization into emptiness. I might read here before we, well, yeah, before we get into that next section, because it starts getting a little more complicated there, but I might read a little passage from Geshe Sopa. This is page 277, going into 278. He says, the essence of the path of seeing is wisdom, seeing the nature of reality, right? That's what we're mainly aiming for, is the wisdom consciousness that is seeing ultimate truth and seeing it directly, again, not conceptually. Prior to this, it was conceptual. At that moment, it becomes non conceptual. They use this phrase, it's like water poured into water. The object emptiness and the consciousness perceiving emptiness are indistinguishable. Just like if you poured a glass of water into other water, right? You can't say what water. There, Anne Marie's got a glass of water for demonstration. If you pour that into another glass of water, you can't say, oh, there's the water that was the object, there's the water that was the subject. No, they become one. There's no differentiation of subject or object at that point. So that's the essence of the path of seeing. However, the path of seeing is not just wisdom, knowing reality. This alone is not enough. The seven branches are concomitant practices that reinforce wisdom. They are part of the cause that results in nirvana. They are called the branches or limbs of enlightenment because they accompany a realization of ultimate reality on the path of seeing. The seven branches have the same names as some of the practices you do on the first two paths, the paths of accumulation and preparation, right? And I mentioned that earlier. We talked about the five powers and the five strengths in that context. However, because the practices on the earlier paths only subdue the mental afflictions temporarily, they are not considered to be part of the seven branches of the path to enlightenment. The seven branches of enlightenment are practiced with a direct realization of ultimate reality. Practiced this way, they actually remove obstacles to nirvana and replace them with positive qualities. And this is the key, is that this is what we're aiming for, is we want to actually remove these obscurations in our minds so that they will never recur again. This is what is called a true path. And what is resultant from it is a true cessation. You are able to then cease once and for all through your analysis and your realization of emptiness, that level of obscurations of your mind, such that it will never recur again. That's why, again, nirvana is when you've done that completely, removed all of the afflictive obscurations, and you are at peace then, because what disturbs the mind currently will never arise again. Even if you were to meet the most horrific, horrible person insulting you and saying all kinds of things to you, you would never get angry for a second because you don't have the seeds of anger in your mind. And the self that you were grasping to through the ignorance that misperceived that, yeah, it's completely non-existent. You don't have anything that you're be grasping to. So there's nothing that would trigger any more suffering or causes of suffering because you have attained the complete cessation. So that's an introduction to those guys. We're going to look at them in more detail, and they get consolidated into five branches. And there's also some analogies to the possessions of a wheel turning king. But anyway, we'll pursue that more in next week's class, which, by the way, again, we will still start at 6 o'clock, but we will have a practice at 5:30, and I will be up in Nagampa to lead that practice, just a little practice for Sakadawa. Again, Sakadawa being, as Rinpoche says, kind of the most powerful day of the year because it's got three events in the Buddha's life. I mentioned these earlier, commemorating the birth, which is celebrated by some communities on a different day, but in the Tibetan tradition, they are said to all happen in the lunar calendar on the same day, the day the Buddha was born, the day he attained enlightenment, the day he passed away from this life, showing the aspect of impermanence so that we would get it, so that even, everything is temporary and impermanent, and we need to kind of work out a way to resolve all of that ourselves. So So that will be next Thursday. And it's, by the way, a very good day to do all kinds of other virtuous, meritorious practices. If you want to do the 8 Mahayana precepts or do other things during that day, Rinpoche says the merit we create on that day is increased 100 million times. Now, again, if we create non-virtue on that day, that's also increased 100 million times. So be careful what you do next Thursday. But if you can certainly come to the Gompa, if you're able to take part in what we're going to do at 5:30, a few prayers, recitations, and then we'll do the class around 6, and then we'll conclude at 7:30 as usual. Any questions or comments from tonight? Do want to thank people for allowing me to do this online tonight because my drive back in the rain and everything, I was kind of tired when I got back here. So there's no way that I would have been able to head up to Taos today. But yeah, I think Adrian had a question, please, or comment.
Hey, hi, Dylan. It's great
Hello.
teaching. I've had so many questions. Hello, so many questions.
That's
But
good.
one that keeps, oh, too many. But one that keeps coming out from earlier
Mhm.
is how, I'm sure I'm imaginative enough, I think, maybe, to come up with my own answers on this. But okay, but how might a God create virtue in the God realm?
Well, I think
Or
it's,
even the deity?
yeah, I mean, I think it's still
I mean, if
possible.
it's such a magical place, how can they create virtue? Yeah.
I mean, again, they are somewhat intoxicated by pleasure in those realms so that they don't necessarily think that there's anything wrong with samsara, or they don't see the faults because of they don't see the faults until too late, right? Until those last 7 days that the gods experience that incredible mental anguish. But nonetheless, they again, if you did have a Buddha appearing, someone who would you have the karma to experience them coming into your God realm and your God existence, and they begin to teach on the Dharma, and you might be able to again accumulate some merit by following those teachings, by engaging in certain acts or whatever that would be done in the God realm. I don't know. They don't talk about these realms as much as I would like to know about. I agree that kind of gets to be a little bit of we have to sort of connect the dots ourselves and what sorts of things might they do. Um, I guess they do have, I have heard that there are animals in the God realm. So, they have animals that they might be caring for and being kind towards and whatever. There might be some ability to generate some sort of generosity, some sort of patience towards others, what have you. But again, there's not that much to trouble the gods. And that's one of the faults or problems from a samsaric perspective is that you end up in this idyllic place that you just don't have the things there that are essential that we get in our human life quite frequently that allow us to generate the virtue of being patient in the midst of being, tormented by others or having to refrain from killing beings who are being harmful to us or stealing from them or whatever. So a lot of the virtues that we normally associate with the human realm of the 10 virtues that are the opposite of the 10 non-virtues, there's not as much opportunity to practice. But if they are given Dharma teachings, as they were when again the Buddha himself appeared there in the realm of the 33 to teach his mother, they can generate some kind of intellectual, mental, virtuous energy by way of learning the Dharma and learning about all these things. I suppose it's somewhat similar. I mean, if you went to the God realm, maybe you would still be able to get through to the gods and say, it's not like this everywhere in samsara, folks, and you could talk to them about the realms of suffering and you could talk to them about all these things and maybe they'd start to generate some idea of it in the way that we're generating ideas of these other realms ourselves. So I don't know. I don't hear, I've
Hmm.
never heard any of my teachers give a talking about how do you create virtue in the God realms. But that's one of the problems is that
Huh.
you are generally just kind of blissed out. It's kind of like people who are very, very rich and well off in this world, right? Human beings. I think we can see all 6 of these realms mirrored in human existence. And we've talked about that before, whether we think these are actual realms or not, or whether we see them as mirrors of human existence. It helps to do both, right? To see that a lot of people are in this more idyllic, blissful state and don't see the suffering of the world at all and they almost want to be blind to it and don't really want to pay much attention to it. And then, of course, when something does come along in their lives, then they become totally distressed and can't deal with that reality. And then there
It
are,
does seem like it's all. Yeah.
Go ahead.
It, I tend to think of these realms and, might not be true, but as more allegorical than anything, just for our own lives, just that they can be
Oh,
realms that are here and
mhm,
now.
mhm.
Um, but, and then then when you were mentioning that the demigod realm is jealous of the god realm,
Well,
and that the gods fight them, that they battle, that they actually, and I thought to myself, well, okay, wait a minute. If it's so pleasurable and desirable and wonderful, I mean, here are some troubles. Here are some troubles right
sure,
here,
sure.
where the demigods are attacking the god realm, and so there's a battle going on. To me, that's not a very desirable
But if
thing
you're the
to,
gods, if you're the gods and you can like quelch the demigods pretty easily, then it's maybe not so
uh-huh.
bad, because you've got the might of the gods behind you, and so you don't. I don't know. I mean, yeah, there is. I don't want to make it sound like it's just totally idyllic, but it's idyllic enough to where these sorts of troubles aren't seen in the light that they would be seen in the human world, right? I mean, you were talking about these being kind of allegorical and different beings that are in this realm, but we could even say they're in terms of our own behavior, right? We might see, oh, there's my godlike mind coming up when I get too prideful about what I do possess, or there's my demigod realm when I see other people who have things I
Yeah.
don't, and I see my own jealousy, or there's my animal mind coming up when I kind of get dull and want to just veg and sleep on the couch and whatever. And there's my miserly, hungry ghost stuff going on. So we can, do it with seeing others, but then we can also look at these as patterns that we have in ourselves. Because as I was pointing out, all of these realms are a product of the same afflictions that we all deal with. I didn't point out the human realm. I missed that one. The human realm is actually said to be a product of attachment. Look at the realm we live in. It's all about attachment. It's all about, the sense objects we have around us and craving them and desiring them and then getting upset when we don't get them. And so we've got our kind of crazy human mind that's about attachment. That's always a part of our existence too, but each of these is indicative of a particular realm that is a product of that type of mindset. So that's another
Mhm.
way to work with these. But I have confidence that these are all actual realms as well. It
Uh,
makes sense. Of course, when we look at the animal realm, we are convinced that there is something there. There are beings that we can look at and see and be around and care for and whatever, because they're right in front of us, beings going through that type of an existence. And I'm not trying to diminish their state of mind. I mean, we know many of them do have very loving qualities and domestic animals and what have you that we can get very close to and enjoy being in the company with and what have you. Um, but nonetheless, it's not, again, a very ideal situation in terms of the ignorance that they have and the inability for them to be able to do something constructive with that life. But we ourselves are often that way, right? We have periods of our day perhaps where we just shut it all off and don't even want to think about it and just want to veg or whatever. I don't know. So everything can be mirrored in what we see in others, what we see in ourselves, and then, again, perhaps even the actual kind of physical experiences that beings go through karmically. Thank you for that, though. That brought
Okay,
up some more
thank you.
points too that I didn't get a chance to share earlier. So, yeah.
Thank you,
And
Jen.
anything else, Adrian, or anyone
I
else?
wanted to suggest
Uh-huh.
or ask, don't you think these characterizations that you're trying to describe would be easier for us if we could just, have a movie where you have people that are in hell or, on
Mhm.
different levels up um, to the highest Buddha. And
Mhm.
I think that would be very helpful. And I'm sure I'm not the first person to say this. Have there been ever like movies or something?
Um, I don't know that anyone's ever made like a film that's on like all six realms and trying to kind of give a visual image and an experience of what that's like that we can watch. Again, I mentioned that Rinpoche would encourage people to watch the animals that are in the nature films, right? And we all like the ones that are very cute and fun and all the animals playing and having a good life. But when the bird flies overhead and is about ready to pick off the little, the baby prairie dog or whatever, that's the parts we don't want to watch. But that's part of the existence of being an animal. So I mean, we do have it with regard to animals, and we can certainly see the suffering of humans just turning on the news and looking at what's going on in Gaza or looking at what's going on in other parts of our world, right? So we have those, but I don't know. I'm not aware of anybody who's maybe been imaginative enough to put together a film with all of these depicted, but oh, maybe it's a project for
We could
somebody to
have
undertake.
several weeks of it. Yeah, would be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think again to meditate on these, to reflect on these, to use these verses even to kind of bring to mind the types of suffering. And it again, whenever we think about the lower realms, there can be two aspects to it. One is to think about yourself being in that state. What would it be like for you to be born in the hell of black lines where they're drawing black lines on your body as it's stretched over this, burning surface and what have you? The other one is where we generate compassion for beings who are in those experiences right now. If those are realms that exist, or if there are other hellish types of existences in the human realm, even, we want to open our hearts with compassion to them. But here, the main impetus is the first one, really to get what it would be like for us to be in that experience, so that we get this distaste for samsara, realize that it's all a trap, it's all, a hideous prison, even the most delightful places, but certainly those places that are, unbelievable suffering. So, well, we should conclude. Thank you for that comment, though, Anne-Marie. It would be interesting. Maybe Usul he apparently studied filmmaking for a while. Maybe he would like to put a film together for the organization on these various realms. But all right, shall we do the dedication? Do we have a dedication list? I don't know if we have the list with us because it's at the center, but maybe we can bring to mind those beings who we want to dedicate for. I know that poor Amata, one of the beings who was on our list previously, Duchen, the sheep, who was just about a year and a half old or so, that she had rescued from the neighborhood, was born, wasn't being fed by its mother, and I've kind of followed the life of Duchen through Amata's posts, and he passed away yesterday. Had a intestinal obstruction, and anyway, my heart goes out to Amata and of course to Duchen, and I know there are many other beings that we all could bring up and bring to mind, but for brevity's sake, just bring them into your own heart right now and dedicate for their welfare, thinking that through what we've done here tonight, may their suffering be removed and may they find all the causes for complete, total, perfect happiness. And then let's do the prayers. Sorry. Let me get that on the screen. And Jana will lead us in doing those, if you don't mind, Jana. If I can get the right one on the screen. Okay.
Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Long life prayers for His Holiness, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And for Osalhita, Lama Yeshe's reincarnation, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us and intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. And for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losong, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones. May the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples.
Thank you, Jana, for leading the prayers, and thank you all for being here tonight. And I want to give a shout out also to Venerable Rabina, who was kind enough to do a teaching for all of you last Thursday. I haven't had a chance to listen to the teaching, but I'm glad that you were able to have a hit of Venerable Rabina in there. I'm going to see her this weekend here in Santa Fe a bit, have lunch with her tomorrow. So, but anyway. All right, everyone, I will be there up in person in Taos. By the way, we're having dinner at 4:15 at Hunan Restaurant, a little earlier than usual, in order to make sure we're there for the 5:30 start time of the prayers and that for Sakadawa. So, all right, everyone, have a good week.